beyond your experience, beyond your imagination.
I recently watched Dune 2021 and have to admit that Dune 1984 by David Lynch is still the version I like the most. I still remember the feeling when the theatre lights came up, a large part of my mind still wanting to remain spellbound in those red velvet seats, until Paul invites you into the conversation and Chani turns to ask you the most important question.
Tell me of your homeworld, Uso.
But behind that sense of enchantment lies a reality so harsh, it's almost unbelievable. Did you know that Dune was considered an unfilmable project for more than a decade? That the film's greatest icon, the sandworms of Arrakis, were massive, multi-ton machines operated by human hands under brutal shooting conditions? And that even the director of the film himself, David Lynch, eventually removed his name from the work and has since regarded it as an experience he never wants to revisit. Below are 20 facts that show Dune 1984 wasn't just a movie, but a mad gamble by Hollywood. 20. Every major Hollywood director turned it down before Lynch. I still remember my surprise when I first heard Dune described as the unfilmable movie. Not merely difficult, but something you simply shouldn't touch. A novel that was too thick, too political, layered with too many meanings, and offering far too little that could be neatly contained within a few hours on a Friday night. For over a decade, Hollywood tried and retreated. Ridley Scott spent 2 years developing it before walking away with a blunt conclusion. Too complex for cinema. George Lucas considered it, but veered towards Star Wars, a universe that was easier to grasp, brighter, and safer. Steven Spielberg was approached multiple times, and each time he declined. Everyone saw Dune as great. No one could solve the equation. How do you compress an endless desert into a single film? Producer Dino De Laurentiis knocked on the doors of dozens of A-list directors. The answer became monotonously familiar. Great idea, but no. Dune turned into an inverted legend. The more famous it became, the less anyone dared to take it on. Then a name appeared. David Lynch, the director of Eraserhead. A filmmaker known for nightmares, not epic spectacle. When Lynch said yes, the industry didn't think masterpiece. They thought disaster. But perhaps that was precisely why Dune got made. Sometimes the hardest projects only find a way forward when they fall into the hands of someone who doesn't know fear. 19. The sandworms were practical models, operated by dozens of people. As a kid watching Dune, I always thought the sandworms were cinematic magic, there to overwhelm the audience, then vanish. Only much later did I learn the truth. They were real, not biologically, but in the sense of weight, physicality, and bone-deep exhaustion. The sandworms, the icons of Arrakis, were entirely practical effects. The largest model stretched over 40 feet long, weighed several tons, and was operated using hydraulics and cables. Not by one person, but by dozens of technicians, each responsible for a small movement. One mistimed motion, and the entire creature would look dead in the most literal cinematic sense. The worm's mouth contained hundreds of custom-made teeth. Its throat was detailed enough for close-ups, because Lynch wanted the audience to feel swallowed, not just to see it happen. The rumbling sound didn't come from a single source, but from a blend of elephant calls, whale sounds, and distorted industrial noise. Alive, geological, and deeply wrong. Building and operating the sandworms consumed a huge portion of the budget. But in return, the film gained something that CGI of that era, and even much CGI afterward, couldn't replicate: weight. You believe in the sandworms because they occupy real space, cast real shadows, and make the humans around them feel genuinely small. That's the paradox of Dune. A surreal film whose most terrifying elements were created entirely by human hands. And sometimes, it's precisely that labour that allows a myth to endure longer than any visual effect. 18, the cast underwent military-style training. Watching Kyle MacLachlan on screen, it's easy to forget that Dune was his very first feature film role. Paul Atreides appears fragile, hesitant, and inexperienced. But behind that image lay a preparation process that was nearly brutal. The actors playing warriors didn't just train a bit. They went through weeks of high-intensity preparation that felt more like a military boot camp than Hollywood rehearsal. Real blades, real techniques. Fight choreographers developed distinct combat styles for each faction. Atreides fought differently from the Harkonnens, and the Fremen were an entirely different story. The harshest training applied to close combat scenes and the Gom Jabbar test. For MacLachlan, it pushed both physical and mental limits. The exhaustion you see on screen isn't entirely acting. It's the reflex of a body forced past its threshold and a mind struggling to hold on. Lynch believed that physical preparation would change how actors existed within the frame, how they stood, walked, and looked at one another. He was right. There's a genuine bond among the warrior characters because it reflects the real camaraderie forged by the cast after days of punishing training. Strangely, in a film filled with internal monologues, what makes the world feel believable comes from sweat, time, and very real discipline. 17 Sting trained in swordsmanship for months for a single scene. Do you remember Feyd-Rauther's duel? It doesn't carry the rhythm of a showy, crowd-pleasing set piece. It's short, tense, and uncomfortable, like two people who aren't performing, but genuinely assessing how the other might kill them. I later learned that this feeling was no accident. Sting spent months studying medieval swordsmanship for just one scene. As Feyd-Rauther, he wasn't allowed to fight like a typical villain. His style had to feel aristocratic, disciplined, precise, formally trained, while also radiating the pathological cruelty of someone who treats killing as entertainment. Those two qualities contradict each other. To reconcile them, Sting trained with historical combat specialists, studied ancient European styles, and worked with the choreographer to develop movements belonging only to Feyd. The result is a duel that isn't beautiful in a cinematic sense, but terrifying in a human one. It feels like a confrontation where both fighters know that a single misstep means death. And perhaps that's why, in a film full of surreal imagery, this moment is the one that most convincingly conveys real danger. 16. The costumes required months of handcrafted work. Many of us probably thought something simple while watching Dune. This movie looks strange. Not strange in a sleek, futuristic way, but strange as if it had existed for a very long time and was merely caught on camera by chance. Only later did I realise that this feeling came from the costumes. Designer Bob Ringwood spent over a year creating Dune's costume system. Not just a few striking outfits, but a complete visual language for every faction, class, and environment.
One of the most interesting things about designing Dune was solving the still suit. The still suit is the essential,
The still suits, the desert survival gear, were built as real functional garments with working water recycling systems, tubes, reservoirs, locks, and thick, heavy fabric. When actors wore them, they weren't just playing people who live on Arrakis. They felt like they were surviving moment to moment. The Guild Navigator costumes had to integrate practical effects mechanisms for mutation scenes. Royal attire used real metal, hand embroidery, and custom jewellery, heavy and uncomfortable, fitting for people who live within power and ritual. Each great house had its own armour, accessories, and materials, reflecting status and culture without a word of dialogue. Everything looked used, worn, and marked by time. And because of that, the costumes weren't just something to look at. They gave the world of Dune weight, making it feel like you were stepping into a real civilization, not a backdrop hastily assembled for a camera. 15. Much of Max von Sydow's performance was improvised. There are characters in Dune who don't appear often, but every time they do, the atmosphere instantly shifts. Dr. Kynes is one such character. He speaks little, slowly, and always seems to be thinking about something beyond the frame. The reason is that Max von Sydow approached the role in a very un-Hollywood way. He set aside portions of the script and chose to improvise based on his own understanding of the character. David Lynch not only allowed this, he encouraged it. Von Sydow studied Herbert's novel closely, building his own motivations, rhythm of speech, and physical presence for Kynes. Instead of delivering lines, he lived inside the character. Many of Kynes's most memorable moments were not in the original script, but were created on set, in instances when Lynch let the camera roll longer than planned. The result is a Kynes who doesn't feel like a written character. He feels like a person who existed before the film began, and who will continue to exist after it ends. There's a naturalness that's difficult to imitate, something that only emerges when an actor truly understands the world he's standing in. 14. The large-scale sets were built across multiple countries. When watching Dune, you get the sense that its spaces weren't merely designed, but possess depth, hidden corners, and very human emptiness. This wasn't accidental. Dune was filmed in Mexico, the UK, and other locations, with enormous sets constructed like real architectural structures. The Atreides Palace was large enough to host sweeping political scenes as well as intimate family moments. The Harkonnen industrial zones were adapted from real factories, complete with machinery, corridors, and an atmosphere that felt genuinely industrial. Lynch believed actors needed to live within a space, not simply stand in front of it. When you walk down a real, long corridor, when echoes aren't sound effects, when lighting is imperfect, performance changes naturally. Bodies respond differently, eyes behave differently. The scale of Dune's construction was so vast that some sets took months to complete, requiring engineering strong enough to support cameras, lighting, and effects. But in return, the environment ceased to be mere background. It became a silent character, telling its story through material, space, and sheer weight. 13. Patrick Stewart insisted on turning Gurney Halleck into a warrior poet. The first time I watched Dune, I always felt that Gurney Halleck was slightly out of sync. In a world dominated by intrigue, violence, and prophecy, he appears with a musical instrument, a deep voice, and the gaze of someone who has read far more than battle manuals. At the time, I couldn't quite name it. Later, I realised that was Patrick Stewart's unmistakable imprint. Stewart came into Dune with a classical theatre background, Shakespeare flowing through the way he spoke and stood, and he refused to let Gurney be just a burly soldier. Stewart wanted him to be a cultured warrior, someone who knows how to kill, but also how to sing. Someone who understands discipline without losing artistic sensitivity. He worked directly with David Lynch to develop small, intimate moments. Gurney playing music, Gurney teaching Paul not just how to wield a weapon, but how to exist in a brutal world. In doing so, Gurney stopped being a supporting character. He became a torchbearer, a bridge between political violence and deeper values of leadership, sacrifice, and memory. And because of that, the world of Dune gains depth. Gurney reminds us that Arrakis isn't only a land of the strong, but also a place where people with inner lives struggle to preserve a fragment of humanity. 12. David Lynch turned down Return of the Jedi to make Dune. Some decisions in film history sound wrong the moment you hear them. David Lynch turning down the chance to direct Return of the Jedi in order to make Dune is certainly one of them. In 1981, the adaptation rights to Dune were nearing expiration. Dino De Laurentiis was forced to find a director. His daughter, Raffaella, after watching The Elephant Man, had an intuitive feeling. Lynch was the right choice. At the same time, George Lucas was inviting Lynch to direct the final chapter of the Star Wars trilogy, a safe project with guaranteed success. Lynch looked at Star Wars and said no. He didn't see himself belonging to that universe. Instead, he chose Dune, a project that had already devoured numerous directors before him. The irony is that Lynch had never read Dune and wasn't even a science fiction fan. But perhaps that very distance gave him something other directors lacked: pure recklessness, unburdened by fandom, unobsessed with faithfulness to the source. Lynch served as both director and screenwriter, completing the script in just 6 months. In hindsight, this was a fateful crossroads. Had Lynch chosen Return of the Jedi, he might have secured a massive hit and a safe position within the system. But he wouldn't have Dune, a strange failure, yet also the work that paved the way for his most intense creative period. Sometimes, the wrong choice is exactly what defines an auteur. 11. Lynch wrote a script longer than most novels. There's a lesser-known truth. Lynch's Dune failed from the page. His original script ran over 300 pages, equivalent to a 6-hour film, a number that would make any studio executive break into a sweat. Lynch absorbed Frank Herbert's novel in a very Lynchian way, without filtering, without simplification, without fear of confusion. The first draft attempted to include every subplot, every character, every philosophical concept. The script overflowed with internal monologues, extended world-building explanations, and meticulous descriptions of Arrakis's complex political system. Studio executives were both horrified and impressed. They could see how deeply Lynch understood this world, but understanding didn't equal feasibility. Lynch was forced to cut, merge characters, shorten storylines, eliminate entire sequences. He spent months simply trying to shrink his original ambition. And ironically, even the condensed version was still too long for commercial release. That explains why Dune on screen feels both rushed and heavy, like an encyclopedia forced to be read in a single evening. 10. The sound design required inventing new technology. If you close your eyes while watching Dune, you still know exactly where you are. That isn't accidental. Sound in this film is treated as a character, not as background. David Lynch and sound designer Alan Splett created soundscapes unlike anything that had existed before. They had to build custom equipment and experiment with entirely new recording methods. The combat sounds of the Weirding Way were created by layering human voices, industrial machinery, and animal noises, then distorting them through experimental electronic filters. The sandworm sounds are both organic and mechanical, as if the creature and the desert itself are a single entity. Lynch wanted every sound to feel alien yet emotionally resonant. That demand led to months of experimentation, recording, destroying, rebuilding, and recording again. Sound doesn't merely illustrate the image, it converses with it. It creates unease even when nothing is happening within the frame. The result is a singular sonic signature. Dune isn't loud in the blockbuster sense, but it constantly rumbles as if the world itself is breathing, slowly, heavily, and without friendliness. 9. A production from hell. There's something deeply strange about looking back at the history of Dune. This film seems as if it never wanted to be born. From the early 1970s onward, Hollywood tried to pull it onto the screen and slipped every single time. In 1971, producer Arthur P. Jacobs, Planet of the Apes, Dr. Dolittle, pursued the adaptation rights, but he died in 1973 and the project died with him. Just 1 year later, Dune was reborn in France under Alejandro Jodorowsky, and this time, the dream exploded beyond all limits. Pink Floyd was invited to compose the music. Orson Welles and Mick Jagger were considered for roles. H.R. Geiger designed entire worlds. But the problem was this: Jodorowsky didn't want to make a movie. He wanted to create a 10 to 14-hour experience meant to change human consciousness. The budget collapsed. The project imploded. Dune returned to square one. Yet not everything was lost. Part of that project's DNA, especially Giger's designs, would live on in Alien. Dune failed, but its shadow continued to haunt science fiction cinema. 8. Based on a book, all of Dune's troubles began with a book. In 1965, Frank Herbert published Dune after serializing it in Analog magazine. It wasn't originally written to become a sci-fi Bible. It started from something very ordinary. Herbert wanted to write an article about sand dunes in Oregon, but the story slipped out of his control. From geography, it veered into ecology. From ecology, it plunged into politics, religion, power, and destiny. Herbert fell into a storytelling rabbit hole, and when he looked up, Dune had become a fully realized world. The novel won the Hugo Award in 1966, followed by 5 sequels. By 2003, it was being called the best-selling science fiction novel of all time. In the sci-fi world, Dune isn't just a book, it's a benchmark. 7. Post-production chaos. Even after filming wrapped, Dune still couldn't escape the nightmare. The first rough cut ran 4 hours. After multiple revisions, David Lynch aimed for a 3-hour version. Still long, but breathable for a world like Arrakis. Universal Pictures said no. They wanted 2 hours. What followed was a manic race inside the editing room. Dino De Laurentiis, his daughter Raffaella, and Lynch worked day and night, cutting scenes, merging scenes, even reshooting shorter versions of existing material to reduce runtime. At the same time, they added an opening narration read by Virginia Madsen, along with extensive explanatory voiceover. For Lynch, this was a devastating blow. He was both director and screenwriter, the person responsible for the entire artistic vision. Being forced to dissect his own film and insert elements that didn't belong to his original concept was nearly impossible to swallow. 6. David Lynch removed his name from Dunes. The conflict reached its peak after the film left theatres. The theatrical cut of Dune ran 2 hours and 16 minutes. But when it aired on television, the studio decided to reinsert deleted scenes, creating a 186-minute version broadcast over 2 nights, with a recap on the second night, like a stitched-together miniseries. Lynch strongly objected. He demanded that his name be removed from the credits and replaced with the pseudonym Alan Smithee, the name used by directors who publicly disown their work. The TV version was later re-edited into a 3-hour film released on DVD, and Lynch's name disappeared entirely. What's notable is this. Universal repeatedly offered Lynch the chance to create an official director's cut. Every time, he refused. Dune wasn't a wound he wanted to stitch back together. It was something he wanted to leave as it was. 5. Dune was part of the Marvel Universe. This detail sounds like a joke, but it's completely real. Dune once stepped into the Marvel Universe. Around the time of the film's release, Marvel Comics published a 3-issue Dune adaptation, an obvious attempt to bring the world of Arrakis closer to a mainstream audience. What's interesting is that this comic doesn't look like a typical Marvel book. The artwork isn't superhero styled, there's no rapid-fire action layout. Instead, it feels illustrative, like paintings from an art book, static, solemn, slightly cold. Characters stand more than they run. Space is prioritized over impact. That says a lot about Dune. Even when Marvel tried to package it in comic book form, Dune resisted fast entertainment by its very nature. 4. Action figures, a failure foretold. After Star Wars, every science fiction film was judged by a brutally practical question. Can it sell toys? Dune couldn't escape that test. LJN released a line of action figures, heroes, villains, sandworms, even vehicles. On the surface, everything seemed fine. Good colours, solid detail, designs faithful to the film, a clear hero versus villain lineup for kids to pick sides. And yet, no one bought them. sales were so low that planned additional figures were cancelled and the entire toy line vanished quickly from store shelves. The reason wasn't just the box office failure. The problem ran deeper. Dune isn't a rousing adventure. It's an interplanetary drama about power, ecology, and religion. Those things don't play well as toys. 3. Even the posters didn't know what the movie was about. Looking back at Dune's posters, I always feel like they're arguing with themselves. The first theatrical poster is sparse, more like the cover of an epic novel than a movie advertisement. Then came other posters, busier, packed with characters. But that raised another question. Where is Kyle MacLachlan? The central character disappears, replaced by a romantic, fairy tale-like composition, almost a space love story. Sting appears with a gaze that's both seductive and dangerous, like someone who stepped out of a misaligned dream. Each poster seems to test a different angle: epic, romance, power, mysticism, but none of them truly align, and that mirrors the film's fate itself. No one knew how to sell Dune. 2. Dune found new life on television. It wasn't until it left theatres that Dune could truly breathe. In 2000, the Sci-Fi Channel released the 3-part miniseries Frank Herbert's Dune. This time, audiences stayed. The series earned strong ratings and positive critical reception, enough to greenlight a sequel in 2003, Frank Herbert's Children of Dune, featuring a very young James McAvoy. Notably, these series didn't just retell Dune, they also delved into the sequels, Dune Messiah and Children of Dune. With time to unfold, Dune finally revealed its true strength. Politics had room to breathe, characters had time to exist. Concepts once compressed into distortion in the feature film became clearer. The 2 miniseries ranked among the top 3 highest-rated programs on the Sci-Fi Channel in 2004. A beautiful paradox. Dune failed in theatres, but found new life on the small screen, where it was no longer forced to rush. A failed release and the legacy it left behind. In December 1984, Dune hit theatres. The result? A box office disaster. The film grossed only around $30 to $37 million in the US, not enough to cover its $42 million budget. Meanwhile, Beverly Hills Cop dominated the box office. Dune was swallowed whole. Critics were equally unforgiving. The film was called confusing, ugly, and overstuffed. It landed on Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert's list of biggest disappointments of 1984. Siskel in particular despised the grotesque moments and effects he considered cheap. Plans for a sequel were cancelled, but time is something Dune has always had more of than most. Over the years, the film has been revisited and re-evaluated, not as a perfect adaptation, but as a singular experience, a world filled with politics, mythology, and an atmosphere unlike anything else. Some films are made to please the masses. Dune is not one of them. It was made to test the limits of commercial cinema, to show what happens when an artistic dream too large is forced into a system unprepared for it. And sometimes, those very cracks, the breaks, the excesses, the confusion, are what make us return to it, argue about it, and remember it decades later. If you enjoy behind-the-scenes stories like this, where cinema isn't just glamour, but also sweat, mistakes, and high-stakes gambles, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me which film should we explore next.